Yeah, I think he put it over here and didn't say it. Now, he could cut you down like anyone else could. That's especially being Sagittarius, as you know, and the same as Frank.
Same as Frank.
And the Sages love fun, or not so much fun as they are restless, eager to get to the next thing, or to keep the ball rolling. As I found.
We have a very interesting thing, I'll tell you, while Luke's loading up.
I'm good.
We've got some footage of, in the back of a limo, and Frank and Dean and Sammy are going to do a benefit. I think it was Father Dismas. And it didn't strike me until I remembered a conversation I had with another one of Frank's old buddies, who said, Sammy could really get on your nerves. And when you'd start that rat-a-tat, Frank, he's like, quiet, don't light me up too much. And there's a great thing in the back of the limo where Sammy is going, he's carrying, and Frank is like in between them, and Dean is just like trying to like be somewhere else. He's looking out the window, and Frank's eyes start to get very narrow, right? And it's just like he says to the driver, "Can you hurry up there?" He's like, "Can you
That's
get
funny.
me out of this car
Well,
with him?"
It's funny.
But it's
Yeah.
very funny when you know these things to watch it, because it doesn't mean anything if you just watch it.
No, and you're right. That probably was that St. Louis gig that they did. It's interesting. You can sometimes look at a costume and say, "Oh, that was what he wore in St. Louis." But if you have black tie, they always look the same, so you can't pinpoint it. But I think, I think Frank loved Dean as a real brother. I mean, and as they say, Dean made him laugh because Dean was very quiet and laid back. So when he did speak and say something funny, it was absolutely hysterical. And Sammy was lively, and Peter was, laid back and adorable. So I'm sure that they all complimented each other. And also, Frank could be the only one who could tell Sammy, hold it down, if he so chose. But I know not too long ago, 2 years ago, we were playing poker at Frank's house, and Frank never played, but I hate to miss a hand, in deference to the other group, because when one falls out, it does throw the game, and in deference to my kidneys. I was ran into hey, nobody runs in this house. And Frank and I meekly crept the rest of the way. I'm sorry, Frank, but he wouldn't allow. I was like a child that he corrected. You don't run through this house. So I think Frank could have said to anybody, "Can you stop the tapping?" But on the other hand, he wouldn't want to upset Sam. Frank was a very kind man. We think he was all gruff, and he could throw you out the window and over the balcony. But he was, if you did something to deserve that. But he was a very, very tender guy. Very.
Well, but I think he had a great, these accounts that we've heard where somebody was telling me, I can't remember, down in San Bernardino, about when he went down when Sammy lost his eye, to bring him down to his house in Palm Springs. And Sammy tried to light a cigarette, and, he burnt his nose. And Sinatra said something to him like, no more of those party tricks. It's like, but a great kind of like, get up and go, no matter what it is.
Absolutely.
You don't get defeated by it, you joke about it, you keep moving, which is such a great thing.
Yeah, that he was. I wasn't there then. That was, again, before my time, but, before my time with show business and with those people, those incredible people, but I am not surprised. No, he was a very kind man and very helpful to so many people, as we, those of us in the inner group know who some of the people were, but
were you
not allowed to
privy
tell.
To anything, any of the nicknames that he had for people?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I don't know what I was, but I wouldn't want to ask.
I don't know who you were, but I know that somebody who was very close with him I guess in the 60s 60s when he was still kind of not with Ava, but still, you know, in touch with her. He used to say the patience on the phone. He used to call her the patient. I don't know why, but I know that, you know, that was, but the idea of him coming up with nicknames.
Oh, yeah.
Smokey, and so I don't know where he ever got them. They're great nicknames.
Well, because he's a performer, he's an entertainer, and he's sharp, and I mean, he had matchbooks that said the Dago on them.
El Dago, right?
The Dago, as I remember, but maybe it was El Dago.
Right.
But even about himself, and yeah, but I don't think you're going to lose it. It's going to keep on.
No, I always thought.
Would you rather stop? Well,
What do you think? It's up to you.
Is it stopping?
it
now?
sounds awful, I'm sure.
We're rolling, we're good.
One of the things that's so amazing is that any contact you have with guys of that generation, they're always joking, they're always having a good time, they're always going out to eat. The generations that follow them are all complaining. I mean, I've done things with like the younger comics. It's always some kind of grief.
Mhm.
But these guys, they had such a sense of fun.
It was a different time, you know. Vegas was so alive, and you can imagine what Las Vegas must have been, with about 8 great hotels, a performer from each one of them, if not 2 sets of performers, one from the lounge and one from the main stage, if not 2 from the lounge. So I think it was a habit, a wonderful habit that they had of really enjoying the times, even though they didn't know they wouldn't last. And I think we're in just different time. Now it's television that the comics strive for. They can't break in Omaha, I guess. And now you have to try to get on.
It's also involvement, like the fact that, I mean, throughout Sinatra's career, he was always interested in what was going on in the country. He was interested in FDR.
Oh,
You know,
yes.
I mean, it's much beyond that, I think. He was interested in issues of segregation, you know, I mean.
There's no question he was interested in everything and in improving mankind. There's no doubt about it, and that's why he's so special. It is more than television, but some of the reasons why I think they all had such a good time is they were also localized. There were a bunch of them, and it was, hey, let's have dinner. Hey, let's do. Television is a solitary medium. You can't do it, and there are not many clubs now. And
there was also the sense of they didn't have pollsters. They did what they wanted to do. They said what they wanted to say.
Yeah.
And they didn't seem to care about, oh, there'll be a bad reaction.
It was different times. It was, well, I think better times, but we always think that when they were our times. But it was the individual. Individuals still owned movie studios. Individuals still owned newspapers and television stations and everything. They owned the nightclubs, and it's all much different now. And I think the tube changed everything. I mean, I know it did, but
the intimacy of the nightclubs. Do you have any feelings about? There's something so wonderful about the fact that part of the act was acknowledging and introducing people from the stage. What was that about? They just enjoyed. They enjoyed kind of welcoming people into their celebrity from the stage in Vegas. You know, because you don't ever see that now, where like they introduce all the people in the audience.
well, it's interesting as you ask that. See, what flashes to me again is television. Now we see all those people on all the premieres, and there's coverage. There are television cameras everywhere covering where people are outside of their work, beside the screen. In those days, it was an event to be able to see Barbra Streisand in the audience, because we only would see her in a movie or something. And I think that they did it out of respect, of course, and also out of wanting the audience to have the pleasure of seeing who was in the audience. So,
But they didn't even treat people it wasn't deferential, you know, they'd introduce a guy like Jack LaRue and Dean would say, come on up on stage and kill somebody. I mean, it wasn't
yeah,
deferential.
maybe you're right. Yes, that's a point.
But was
They
it-
introduced me. Certainly nobody screamed and hollered. Who? You know, so that, no, you might be right. It was, I guess, it went with the common courtesy that was called Frank Sinatra, and he probably started it. Or did he? Did Al Jolson ever introduce people in the audience?
I don't
But of
think
course,
so.
Jolson didn't work clubs. Jolson performed on stage. There's a big difference.
Well, there's that great story about George Evans persuading Al Jolson to see Sinatra when he was just starting out at a New York club. And Jolson hated every performer. Jerry Lewis always says he's too much like Jolson, and I think he is. He didn't even want to watch anybody else. He just, him.
And this is true. Huh?
That's right. And he got up and left. And he said in the time that Sinatra was like doing the introduction, he could have done the whole show. So but Jolson was a hateful man, you know, I mean, by all accounts.
Yeah, by all accounts, but evidently he had a right to be cocky. I mean, I guess he is still one of the greatest performers that will ever have hit the stage.
Right.
I never got to see
But
him.
getting back to the introduction, you know, they would
Yeah.
introduce Mrs. Jack Entrada. You know, I mean.
So they were, so again, it was family, and it was people, and I guess Frank and that, even though I'm sure Shecky and the others introduced people in the audience too, and I'm sure Alan King did. So I think it was a precedent that was just something very nice, and that they knew what it would mean to Mrs. Jack and Trotter to be introduced, and not just the stars. But I don't really have the answer there.
Janet Leigh said that it was always difficult to get in front of a mirror when you were getting ready with them. She said that women, actresses, didn't fuss as much as they did with the cufflinks and the tie and what you were wearing. And did you ever experience that just in what you were doing? I know you weren't, it wasn't
No,
a
I
lot
wasn't.
with Ocean's 11.
No.
But did you ever experience their vanity? Did you ever?
No, I didn't think they had any. No, I of course she was, you know, she was the wife of one of the guys. It makes a lot of, again, I'm telling you, it's different when you're a chick. A lot different. No, I didn't get in on that. And I think a lot of it, if it did go on, was horseplay. I think they would do that just to enjoy themselves.
So you don't think they were particularly vain?
No, I don't think they were vain at all. No. I know Frank wasn't. Having a sense of style is not being vain. To me, vain is continuously looking to make sure you couldn't look a little bit better or improve something or fix something. And vanity is great. I mean, it's very important to be vain, but not too vain. No, I don't think Frank was vain at all.
So they just came out looking that great. That's just the way they look.
Oh, I think so. That I think was a habit. Yeah.
Because we interviewed a woman who ran a restaurant down in Atlantic City who knew Dean before he met Jerry. And she said he never came in looking rough or ruggedy. He always had beautiful clothes. I mean, what
That's
was
what
that
I would
about the
suspect.
clothing?
I would suspect that too. It just was a part of their nature. Well, again, in those days, we dressed. When I met my husband, he was totally fantastically dressed every time we got on the airplane. And now he wears jeans and windbreakers and khaki pants because it's different times. Although Frank would never have done that. Frank always dressed. But in those days, people who were especially brought up on the East Coast dressed. And, you know, California, Bing Crosby, I guess, was thrown out of someplace or asked to leave because he had on a Hawaiian shirt. But he was a Californian. And so the East Coast people dressed.
Is there any story that you particularly remember that would define like their relationship from the shooting of Ocean's 11? Any experience on the set, anything that happened when maybe you had a scene with Frank or you had a scene with Dean that was particularly humorous or indicative of what they were like in terms of?
Yes, they. My throat is in unison
you
with the
like
plane.
some-
No, no, I'm fine. I just get froggy. Yeah, I was there when they used the stink bombs under the pool table, when they were all on the set, and they were mischievous, but not to a point of disorder. They would delay things, but they wouldn't stop them from happening. You know, it wasn't an expensive delay. And the shenanigans kept up all the time in small doses. So that was the fun they always had was always obvious. I mean, they were always enjoying each other, these 5 people, especially the 4. I don't remember how close Joey was with them, but the 4 of them were very close, and especially on the movie. And on the subsequent movies. And when Frank did the scene with me, he finished the scene. We were in a nightclub, as I remember, and he did the scene and walked off and kept walking. And they said, but maybe we need another one. Good night. And that was it. And I was nervous about that because, for all I knew, I needed to do another one. I might not have been good enough in that take. Nope, he was gone.
That's the one where he asks you to go away with him?
I can't
Only you would
remember.
proposition your wife?
I don't remember. I haven't seen, I'm not in it enough to remember what I said. I think it was, I only had 2 scenes in it. I think one was with Dean and one was with Frank, as I remember. Maybe 2 scenes with Frank. So that must be the one. I haven't seen it that recently. But that was typical of Frank. I think he probably did that on records too. Good night. That means that's the way it's going to stay.
It's remarkable, though, when you look at when he was trying to make it back, how hard he worked on movies like Man with the Golden Arm. You know, when you think in '54 he made 5 movies.
Really?
And yeah,
Wow.
Not as a Stranger, The Tender Trap, Young at Heart, Man with the Golden Arm, and I can't
Probably
remember the
Guys and
other one.
Dolls.
That's
Guys and
right,
Dolls,
that's
exactly.
right.
Now, think of how much you would have to work and then put all those albums out. So we've been making.
Maybe he didn't put the albums out in '55.
He did. He also
Did he?
did. But a lot.
Oh,
of
yes,
people-
Swingin', one of the big ones was made in '55.
That's right. But the thing that's
forget the names.
so remarkable is that, you know, after having that time with Ava where he was like really out of the loop,
Oh,
once
yeah.
he got back into the loop, it was like working so much
Mm-hmm.
that I think at a certain point, once he made it back, at least Howard Koch told me, once he made it back, he became much more the one-take guy because he was killing himself before. You know, with Otto Preminger again and again and again. Once he got the control, he
Well-
wanted to make it, you know, in other words, he didn't want to spend things. He always felt he
That's
was
right.
better the first time.
I also feel that Frank knew himself. It isn't so much that he got the control, I believe, is that by now he knew when it was right. And he had now worked enough to know that was good or good enough, more than having control. Because he did respect people who said, Frank, we really need another one, if it was a take or another take on a song, because I've heard some of those stories. If Nelson Riddle or somebody were to say, we really have to do it again, he would respect that. You know, he would do it for people he really respected. But I do think that by this time he knew himself very well.
What's your take on Ava Gardner? I had someone say to me from A&E, why do we have Ava Gardner in this? And I said, because Ava Gardner was to Frank what Jerry Lewis was to Dean. You know, it was like, you can't talk about Dean without talking about Jerry. And before the Rat Pack, you can't talk about Frank without talking about Ava, because the influence is so profound. All of the, you know, his whole life is so profound through those years. And, you know, it's interesting if you look back that when he was nominated for an Academy Award for Man with a Golden Arm, she was also nominated for like Magambo or something. So she was a tremendous stature in those days.
She was a huge star. I would not quite equate Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin with Frank Sinatra and Ava Gardner. One was a professional life and one was a romantic life. Aside from Ava's intervention, as I am told, to get him into From Here to Eternity, which she probably did. I don't think that story would continue if it weren't so. Aside from that, she really...
It's also a great story because all those fictitious stories about the boys getting him into that was not true.
I've never
had
even
three
heard it.
different people tell me that Ava made the call.
Oh,
Everybody
I think
knows
so.
that.
I think that's true. So aside from that, from there on, Frank was on his own, and so I dispute the comparison.
No, I'm only saying in terms of.
But
if
as
you wanna
far-
look at the years.
As
you know,
far as how well, and they weren't together very long, you know, a couple of years, right? But what what a couple of years! I just I don't know because I came in at the end of that love affair, and so I only can speak of my time there. I do know that he was mad about her. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And why wouldn't he be? I mean, that is a great combination. But he didn't seem to be torching when I knew him. I think, again, he has great respect for people that he loves. And I think he would miss her as a person as much as miss her as his wife or lover. And but I guess they just couldn't cope with each other. And I can understand that. It's water and oil. It's sure fun while you're trying to get it to mix. But when you find out it won't mix, you're tired.
Well, you know, people love to talk. I don't think that I've tried to interview so many people about the Five Guys, but nobody ever really wants to talk about anybody except Frank, which is the hardest thing because I'm doing something about five people. People just keep getting back to Frank, and even people who hardly knew Frank. I mean, I'm talking not like you knew Frank, but other performers and things would say he loved. I mean, one guy said that if you would sit down with Dean Martin at a table and start talking about something that happened not years ago but last week, he'd get up and leave because he hated the past. He hated reminiscing. But if you sat down with Frank and reminded him of something from 15 years ago, you'd have him for hours. He would go over every detail. He loved reminiscing. He never forgot where he met you, what was going on, if you were cold, if it was snowing. And, you know, just in terms of doing a show, trying to define this was this kind of a person, this was this kind of a person, you know. But everybody always likes to talk about Frank. And I guess it's just because he had the magnitude, you know. I mean, he was the force. You know.
There's nobody like Frank. There never will be. He was a phenomenon in all respects of his life. In all. And I tend to disagree again a little about Dean Martin. It isn't that he didn't want to dwell in the past. It was that he wanted to go home and go to bed. Dean enjoyed being quiet and alone and watching television or something, whereas Frank enjoyed people. That's the big difference. And Frank was very, very well informed about and interested in more things. Dean was not interested. It just wasn't as interesting as something he could go home and read or something.
Did you have a chance to witness?
But let me just finish because you
Okay.
won't forget
Sure,
your
go ahead.
question.
Go ahead.
I defy you to come up with somebody as fascinating as Frank Sinatra. That's why everybody goes back and that's who they talk about. It doesn't matter how great Sammy was, and Sammy was one of the greatest performers ever to come along that we'll ever see, and a wonderful person. Dean was a wonderful person. Peter was great. Joey is one of the funniest men. And yet, the real phenomenon of them all is Frank, and you just can't help. He is an extraordinary persona. You can't talk enough about him, and yet you can never define him. I mean, that's the elusive magic.
You had a chance to watch him with Kennedy. How would you describe that dynamic between the two?
Well, I didn't see them very much together. Very, very respectful, and liked each other very much, but not, oh, hey, buddy.
But interesting because, you know, they say that Frank always loved politics and was fascinated by politics, and Kennedy was always loved show business. So
That's
that
true.
It was almost that kind of thing, you know, the one kind of vicariously envying what the other had.
Well,
Do you
not.
think that was true?
Yeah, I don't think it was envy, but I would, that did happen. When President Kennedy was at his sister's and he had his first lunch in California, he said, "You all want to talk about politics, and I want to talk about movies." So yes, that part is true, but that would be normal. I mean, I'm sure most politicians, except for allowing their ego to expound on what they know, they have it all year in Washington. If they come out to California or have dinner in New York with some stars, they're not going to want to talk about politics. I don't think, but come to think of it, maybe they would want to talk about their own agenda. Well, I think you would have two, now that I think of it. There are two kinds of politicians. Those that are wrapped up in themselves and in their agendas, and those that put that aside and now enjoy life. And that was President Kennedy.
You know, we were looking at some footage from UCLA. When Khrushchev comes, where do they bring him? They bring him to meet Frank.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, he was the greatest star that we've ever had. And again, not just a movie star, not just a recording star, not just a powerful figure in the city or in the country. He was all of that. And I don't know, of course, we'd have to look to see who was filming at the time Khrushchev came. Maybe nobody very interesting was filming. I don't want to take it for granted.
It was on the set of Can. It's before
Yeah,
Kennedy gets
I know.
elected.
Yeah, but it still is, I mean, to be very Libran about it, you'd have to look and say, well, let's see, what's shooting in town? What can Khrushchev go to see? Oh, no, that won't matter. I mean, maybe that was the biggest gig in town,
But
with or without Frank.
There's a wonderful moment because all of these women, Shirley MacLaine, Julia Perez, are all around Khrushchev. And Frank reaches over to the side and grabs Mrs. Khrushchev, who was there like in a burlap sack, to bring her in, you know, to the manners or something.
His manners were unbelievable. And he would know, yes, just what to do there. To not, and he wouldn't do it for any reason except to know that should be done. It would be polite and good manners to include Mrs. Khrushchev in that kind of a situation. He was impeccable. The taste of the man is just never to be matched.
Let's take a break and damn her. I have like two more questions.
Answering some of the things, but that's just an interesting point since we're off not shooting.
Right.
You might, just for your own personal interest, look in 1959 at what was shooting. I mean, I'd be curious.
That's a very good
It is
Need a new tape.
it's without jumping to conclusions,